There are many stories in the Bible that have been told and retold throughout history, stories of faith, triumph, betrayal, and miracles. But hidden in the pages of Scripture are certain tales that are rarely spoken of. These stories contain mystery, controversy, and moments that challenge our understanding of faith and the human condition. Today we're diving into one such story, a tale that is rarely preached from the pulpit. It's a story of a king who, in his darkest moments, sought out answers in a place that was strictly forbidden. This is the story of King Saul and the Witch of Endor. Our story begins in a time of crisis for Israel. The nation's enemies, the Philistines, were gathering their forces for war. This wasn't just any battle, the stakes were higher than ever. Israel's future, its very survival, was at risk. And standing at the center of this conflict was King Saul, the first king of Israel, a man who had once been chosen by God himself to lead his people. But by this time, Saul was a broken man. The man who had once been a strong and promising leader was now consumed by fear and paranoia. His relationship with God had deteriorated, and for years, Saul had lived in the shadow of his own mistakes. It wasn't always this way. When Saul was first anointed king, he had the blessing of the great prophet Samuel, and the favor of God was upon him. But over time, Saul's disobedience and pride led to a gradual and painful separation from God. It started with small disobediences, but the turning point came when Saul directly disobeyed a command from God regarding the Amalekites. Saul was instructed to completely destroy everything man, woman, child, and livestock, but he spared the Amalekite king and kept some of the best livestock for himself. When the prophet Samuel confronted him, Saul's excuses were in vain. Samuel told Saul that the kingdom would be taken from him and given to another, a man after God's own heart, David. From that moment on, Saul's downfall was inevitable. His mind was tortured by jealousy, paranoia, and fear, especially as he watched David, the shepherd boy turned warrior, rise in fame and favor. By the time we reach this moment in 1 Samuel 28, Saul is utterly lost. God is no longer speaking to him. No prophets, no dreams, and not even the sacred Urim used by the priests to discern God's will provide him with guidance. With the Philistine army threatening to crush Israel, Saul is desperate. In his fear, he turns to the unthinkable. Saul, the king who had once purged the land of mediums and spiritists, now seeks out the very thing he had outlawed. He decides to consult a medium, someone who could communicate with the dead. And not just any medium. Saul seeks out the Witch of Endor. Endor was a small, obscure village, nestled away from the main roads. It wasn't a place of prominence, but it had its secrets. Saul knew that there was a woman there, a medium, someone who could contact the dead. She had managed to survive despite the king's earlier purge of witches and spiritists. But Saul couldn't be seen seeking her out openly. This was forbidden. God's law was clear: consulting mediums and spiritists was an abomination. So Saul disguised himself. He shed his royal robes and, under the cover of night, he traveled to Endor, accompanied by 2 of his servants. Imagine the scene: the once great and powerful king of Israel, now cloaked in darkness, creeping toward a forbidden encounter. A man who had once led armies with the strength of the Lord, now stooping to seek answers from a source he had condemned. It's a picture of desperation. When Saul arrived at the witch's home, she was immediately suspicious. She didn't know it was Saul, of course, but she could sense something was wrong. She knew the risks.
"Surely you know what Saul has done,"
she said.
"He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you setting a trap for me to get me killed?"
Saul, in his desperation, made an oath in the name of God himself that no harm would come to her. How ironic, right? Here was Saul, breaking God's command, swearing protection in the very name of the God he was defying. But in his mind, he had no other choice. He needed answers, and he was willing to go to any length to get them. Reluctantly, the witch agreed. Saul's request was simple but horrifying. "Or call up Samuel for me," he said. Samuel, the prophet of God. The man who had anointed Saul as king. The man who had delivered God's commands to Saul, and who had ultimately told Saul that the kingdom would be taken from him. Samuel was dead, buried in the ground, and Saul now wanted to speak to him once more. The witch began a ritual. Perhaps she expected to contact a spirit as she had done many times before, but this time something was different. The Bible tells us that Samuel actually appeared. The witch, shocked and terrified, screamed. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to truly see the prophet of Israel rise from the dead. Immediately she realized who her disguised visitor was.
"You are Saul,"
she exclaimed. But for Saul, the revelation of his identity didn't matter anymore. His focus was entirely on Samuel. The prophet's spirit stood before him, and Saul's heart was filled with fear and desperation. He had sought out this forbidden encounter to get answers, but what he received was something far more devastating. Samuel, appearing from beyond the grave, spoke with authority and judgment.
"Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?"
he asked. Saul, trembling, responded, "I am in great distress. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, so I have called on you to tell me what to do." This was Saul's final plea for help. His last hope was that somehow Samuel could give him the guidance that God had withheld. But Samuel's response was far from comforting. It was a message of doom.
"The Lord has departed from you,
Samuel said,
and has become your enemy. The Lord has done what he foretold through me. He has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David."
The very thing that Saul had feared for so long, the rise of David, was now confirmed. Saul's kingdom would be taken from him, and David would take his place. But Samuel didn't stop there. He had one more prophecy to deliver, a prophecy that would break Saul completely.
"Tomorrow,"
Samuel said,
"you and your sons will be with me."
In one chilling sentence, Saul's fate was sealed. Not only would he lose his kingdom, but he and his sons would die in battle the very next day. The Philistines would defeat Israel, and Saul's dynasty would come to a tragic end. Saul collapsed to the ground, utterly devastated. He hadn't eaten, and now his strength had left him completely. Even the witch, seeing the king in such a broken state, felt pity for him. She urged him to eat something to regain his strength, but what good was food in the face of such a dark prophecy? Still, Saul ate, perhaps out of sheer instinct, knowing that his time was running out. The next day, everything unfolded just as Samuel had said. The Philistine army overwhelmed the Israelites. Saul's sons, including his beloved son Jonathan, were killed in battle, and when Saul saw the defeat of his people and the death of his sons, he knew that the end had come. Rather than be captured by the Philistines, Saul took his own life, falling on his own sword. The king who had been chosen by God, anointed by the prophet Samuel, died in disgrace, far from the favor of the God he had once served. But this story doesn't end with Saul's death. For centuries, this event has raised deep and troubling questions. The most pressing question is, was it truly Samuel who appeared to Saul that night in Endor? Or was it something else? Some scholars and theologians argue that this could not have been Samuel. They believe that the apparition was a demonic spirit, a trickster entity that sought to deceive Saul in his moment of weakness. After all, consulting with the dead was strictly forbidden by God, and it's hard to imagine that God would allow such a practice to bring forth his prophet. Others, however, believe that God made an exception in this case, allowing Samuel to return one last time to deliver a final message of judgment to Saul. The truth remains a mystery. But what is clear is the tragic downfall of Saul, a man who had once been chosen by God to lead his people, but who, through disobedience and pride, lost everything. In his darkest moment, Saul sought answers in a place he knew was forbidden, and in doing so, he sealed his own fate. The story of the Witch of Endor and King Saul is a powerful reminder of the dangers of turning away from God's path. Saul's desperation led him to seek forbidden knowledge, but instead of finding peace, he found doom. It's a chilling tale of what happens when we stray so far from the light that we seek answers in the shadows. Thank you for joining us today as we explored one of the Bible's most controversial and mysterious stories. If this tale left you with questions or thoughts, share them in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold and rarely discussed stories of the Bible. Until next time, remember, there are some doors that once opened cannot be closed again. Stay curious, but be careful where you seek your answers.